All right, welcome. Today, we are digging into one of the biggest questions out there. I mean, the biggest question. Where did we come from? We're going to break down this really fascinating text that looks at three totally different answers to that one single mystery.
You know, it's a question everyone asks at some point. It's been on our minds forever, right? It really gets to the core of who we are and, how we fit into this huge universe. So the text we're looking at presents three really powerful ways to answer that question. You've got the scientific explanation, you've got the biblical story, and then there's this third kind of mythological take. And each one gives us a completely different way of looking at our origins. Okay, so let's get into it. Here's what we've got on tap. We'll kick things off with evolution, then jump over to the story of creation from the Bible. After that, we'll explore this really interesting third narrative that might be new to you. And then we'll pull it all together and see what we've learned.
All right, first up, let's talk science. The theory of evolution tells a story of really, really slow, gradual change that unfolds over just immense periods of time.
And what drives all that change? Well, it's natural selection. You've probably heard of it, survival of the fittest. The basic idea, as Darwin laid it out, is that these tiny little advantages build up over millions and millions of years, and eventually, they can lead to whole new species.
And this right here gives you a feel for just how long we're talking about. I mean, the journey from our ancient, ape-like relatives to us, Homo sapiens, took millions of years. It's a story that scientists have been piecing together with fossil finds, like the famous Tong child back in 1924. But, and this is where it gets interesting, the source text we're exploring points out that even this super well-accepted theory has some tricky questions to answer. It kind of suggests that the story of slow, continuous change might not be totally complete. So, the text zeroes in on two big challenges. First off, the fossil record. It's got some gaps, right? Those famous missing links between species are still pretty hard to find. And then there's the Cambrian explosion. We're talking about 530 million years ago, when life on Earth didn't just crawl forward, it just exploded with all this new, complex diversity. It happened in what's basically the blink of an eye, geologically speaking. And that sudden burst, it really seems to challenge that core idea of slow, gradual change that Darwinism is built on.
Okay, so let's shift gears and look at a completely different origin story. We're diving into the book of Genesis, which offers a narrative that isn't about gradual change at all. Instead, it's all about a single divine act of creation.
And this verse from Genesis really is the cornerstone of it all. It says, humanity was made directly by God in God's image. So in this view, our beginnings weren't random. They were purposeful. They were immediate. We're talking about something that happened over 6 days, not millions of years.
But here's where the story takes a fascinating twist, and our source text really hones in on this. So you have the first family, right? Adam and Eve, and their sons, Cain and Abel. Cain kills Abel, God finds out and banishes him, and Cain's reaction is fear. He says he's worried that whoever finds him is gonna kill him. Which, wait a minute, that brings up a really, really good question. If the only people on the entire planet were his parents, Adam and Eve, who on earth was Cain afraid of? Who is this whoever he's talking about?
Well, the interpretation that our source text offers is pretty mind-bending. It says, maybe this isn't a plot hole. Maybe it's a clue. It suggests that there must have been other people already out there, outside the Garden of Eden. And maybe the story of Adam and Eve isn't about the origin of all of humanity, but just one specific, special lineage.
Okay, now for something completely different. Let's dig into the third narrative from our source, which is definitely the most unconventional of the bunch. This one pictures human history as, well, almost like a cosmic experiment, a game being played by gods. So this table kind of breaks down the key players according to this story. You have a supreme god at the very top, the creator of absolutely everything. Then you have lesser gods, like Jehovah, who was put in charge of our little corner of the universe, the solar system. Then you've got angels, who act as assistants, and then there's us, humanity, basically an experiment taking place on Earth.
And this story has its own wild timeline. It claims that way back, about 1.6 million years ago, different human races were created all over the planet, but they were sort of semi-finished products. Then, way more recently, only about 6,000 years ago, Adam and Eve show up. They're created in the Garden of Eden as a kind of special template or perfected model.
And this brings us right back to that paradox from the Bible. Remember Cain? Who was he afraid of? Well, according to this third story, the answer is super simple. He was afraid of all those other people, the descendants of the earlier human races that were created all over the world long before Adam and Eve even existed. It's a pretty neat way to tie up that biblical loose end, right?
So, okay, we've got these three totally different stories. How in the world do we make sense of them all? Let's actually put them side by side and see what kind of big picture they paint for us.
Let's start with the two we're most familiar with. On one hand, you have evolution, playing out over millions of years through slow, random change. On the other, you have creation, happening in just a few days through a single, purposeful act from God. And as our source points out, each one has its own big puzzle to solve. For evolution, it's that shocking Cambrian explosion. For creation, it's the whole mystery of Cain.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, because we're bringing that third narrative into the comparison. And look at this. You've got three completely different models. Evolution says the creator is just natural processes. The Bible says it's God. The third story says it's a whole hierarchy of gods. And with each one, the method of creation and even the very definition of who we are changes a lot.
So when you boil it all down, what our source material is really showing us is that these aren't just three stories fighting over the same set of facts. They're actually three totally different frameworks for understanding the world. You've got one built on scientific evidence, one built on faith, and one built on myth. And each one gives us a unique way to answer that huge question. Who are we, and what's our place in all of this?
And that really leaves us with one final thought to chew on. You have these different ways of knowing things, right? There's evidence, there's faith, and there's storytelling, or myth. So if you had to write the story of humanity, which of those tools would you use? Because maybe the question isn't just where did we come from, but also how do we choose to tell that story?